we're going to hand it over to Tiara Starks to introduce our first keynote speaker.
Hi everybody, how are you? My name is Tiara Starks. I'm a junior at the University of New Haven, and I'm so thrilled to introduce our keynote speaker, Mita Mallick. Mita Mallick is Head of Diversity and Cross-Cultural Marketing for Unilever, where she oversees strategies for achieving equality and inclusion. The work has paid off, increasing people of color representation at the corporation and achieving a gender-balanced workforce. As a pioneer in the Every Voice Matters, Every Story Celebrated initiative at Unilever, she met with hundreds of employees from diverse backgrounds. Unilever received a 100% score on the HRC Corporate Equality Index for Best Places to Work, LGBT Equality in 2016 and 2017. Mita is a master storyteller and has spent over 15 years leading iconic brands like Aveeno, Avon Color Cosmetics, Chapstick, Vaseline, Suave, and Dove. Welcome to She Leads, Mita.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for that wonderful introduction.
Awesome, yeah. So can you start by sharing more of your background story with us?
Sure. Well, thank you for having me, and thank you to Sherry and team. This is my second time with the organization and chatting with you all. So I wanted to start by sharing my purpose and what really drives me. My purpose is around empowering those who have been excluded to help them find their voice. And, you know, once you find your voice, to never stop using it, which I'm sure can resonate with many of you. And at Unilever, we're really focused on helping people find their purpose. We actually go through full day workshops in small groups, and we actually go back to crucible moments of things that happened in your childhood or early adulthood, and how you can really think about those moments as a catalyst for things that have happened in your life and how that will inform how you show up as a leader. And so my story starts with being the proud daughter of Indian immigrant parents. I was born and raised outside of Boston. We were three families of color growing up in our neighborhood. And I grew up in a time and a place where it was not cool to be Indian. And I think that still resonates for some of us, many of us, whether we're sitting in the US or wherever in the world you're sitting today. It was not cool to listen to Bollywood music. It was not cool to wear Indian jewelry. It was not cool to bring egg curry to lunch and Indian food. And I was bullied pretty heavily, both verbally and physically growing up. And it started with name calling. It started with having things tossed at me and thrown at me. I have a very vivid memory of being in junior high and having the N word and the S word being spray painted in front of our house and on our driveway. And I actually had no idea what those words meant, but they stayed on there for a very long time in what today would be considered a hate crime and should have been considered there then as well. But the town did nothing about it, and we actually couldn't afford to repave the driveway. So the words just stayed there for a very long time until the New England weather washed them away. I was very excited when I was a freshman in high school to take a class called Intro to Physical Science. I was always very interested in the sciences. And I have long hair, but if you can imagine, my hair then was down to my knees, which is not uncommon in Indian culture. So I had a long braid. And I had a lab partner who never spoke to me. She didn't like me at all for whatever reason. And at the same time, I had two boys in the class who had been bullying me for quite some time. And the bullying had kept getting heightened over time. They would yank my head in the hallway. They would hold my hair against the wall. Became more and more physical until that day that they decided to set my hair on fire in class, and actually took lighted matches and kept throwing them at me until the damage had been done. And I remember my lab partner, who never spoke to me, said, you know, your hair is on fire. And it's probably the most painful things I've ever been through as a young adult. I actually never shared that story with my father, who I lost 3.5 years ago, because my hair was so long, the damage had been done, but I think it was probably that like afternoon I got a haircut, or the next day. The two boys were suspended for a day. I had to continue to see them throughout my time at that school. And one of the things that happened to me in that moment was a guidance counselor who was actually the track coach, and took me under his wing and decided that I could run very fast. He saw it in me and I didn't see it in me, but I could run fast. Not very coordinated, but I could run fast. And to this day, running has been something that's really driven me and has been my sort of safe place whenever I'm grieving or struggling. But that was the first time that I saw what advocacy looked like. And I saw someone taking me under my wing because he knew that sports was the great equalizer. And so why do I share that all with you? Because that is what drives me today. I grew up in a community and in a time and a place where I feel like I didn't belong. And I don't want anyone ever to feel that way. So that's my life's purpose. And I think with the killing of George Floyd, the murder of George Floyd, that for me has even become more singular on how important this work is, not just in our companies and our organizations, but in our communities. And how can we be advocates and create inclusive environments wherever we go. So that is what really drives me. And I would say to you that we all have stories to tell. And sometimes we're not comfortable telling our story. And someone once told me that as you become more senior in life, whatever that means, right? Sometimes that means you're going to college, you got your first job, you now have an office. Well, we're all working in a pandemic. Whatever that means to you is when you feel more comfortable sharing your truth. And I would encourage you all to share your truth, because when you share your truth, for me, I took my voice back from those bullies. And when I share my truth, I allow others to share my truth, and I create the space for us to heal together. And stories are constantly being rewritten as well. And so sometimes it's not your own story, it might be the story of someone else you want to share, or how you're an advocate for someone. So that is what really drives me. And that's the impact I'm trying to make in the world.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that background story. I actually saw Mita when I was doing She Works this summer. So that was really exciting just to hear from you and to hear your story. It's truly amazing how you're able to come out of all that and be the strong, important leader. So I have to ask, what are your most important leadership lessons for all of us here?
Yeah. That's difficult to sum up, but let me do my best. I think especially as Sherry started and talking about, there's so much happening in the world today. And I would encourage you not to be disengaged. It's hard. There are days I disengage. This morning I decided I didn't want to watch the news, or the day that the Breonna Taylor verdict came out, I actually went for a walk and decided not to for a while and not have my phone with me. And in a minute, the world had changed again. So I think I would say take the time to disconnect and recharge, because we need to be strong and we need to stay connected to what's happening in the world from us, but allow yourself to take those moments to be kind and take care of yourself. There's a lot that I would leave you with. If I could boil it down to 5 things, I would start with, I think I've heard some of these themes as I was listening to the start of the time you'll spend together today. Number 1, be empathetic. It's so important as a leader to understand experiences that are not your own. And so my job is to listen, is to observe, is to do as much as I can to try to understand what your life might be like. And I'll never fully get there. I'll never be you, you'll never be me. But empathy and kindness, they're such underrated values in society today. And I would also argue that kindness has been seen as such a weakness for so long. I can be tough, I can be firm, and I can be kind, and I am all of those things. So don't ever forget that. I think the second thing is to be open as a leader. And what do I mean by that? Be open to hearing things you don't want to hear. And that's really difficult. And I don't want to get into a political discussion, but I will for a second, just to say that our companies mirror what's happening in the country. My company is just as divided as my company. My family is just as divided as our country. It's a reflection. And so I do have relatives who are supporting Joe Biden, and I have relatives who are supporting President Trump. And I'm not going to disown my family and not love them because they're supporting Joe Biden or because they're supporting President Trump. But I do think it's a moment to get past the rhetoric, to get past the memes, to get past the making fun of this candidate and that candidate, but just to say, let's talk about the issues, right? Black Lives Matter is not a political issue, it's a human rights issue. So if you can get past the, I can't believe you're voting for Joe Biden, or I can't believe you're voting for President Trump, and try to have a conversations on issues, you might learn something that you didn't expect. And that is really important as a leader. In however capacity you're going to lead, you have to be able to listen to difference. And I think political diversity is one that we all, many of us struggle with. I would say the third, as I go back to my story that I shared with you from my from childhood, is to be an advocate. I'm going to sound like the New York City subway, although I haven't taken it since March, is if you see something, say something. Be an advocate. I always say, people ask me, how do you define culture in your organization? It doesn't matter what sort of policies, handbooks, practices you have. Culture is about, am I doing the right thing when no one's looking over my shoulder? Or do I need to open this employee handbook from the 1990s and look up on page 10 what it tells me to do? Be an advocate, do the right thing when no one's looking. And that means if you see someone being interrupted, speak up for that person. If you see someone's ideas being stolen, speak up for that person. If you see me constantly mispronouncing someone's name, correct me, pull me aside and ask me why I continue to engage in that microaggression. It is our job to protect the leader, protect the cultures that we're building. It's your job as a leader to do that. I would say be fearless. Number 4, if I could go back to my 20-year-old self, what would I tell her? Is do it afraid. Don't be so scared about what other people are going to think. You're going to make mistakes. I talk a lot about being an advocate. I identify with the Black community. I am not Black. I am an advocate for the Black community. I will make mistakes. Advocacy costs you something. It's not for free. It will cost me my pride. It will cost me my physical comfort. It might cost me my mental space and well-being for a bit. It will hurt. But imagine the cost of not doing it. So be fearless in the things that you do. And I think the last thing I would leave to all of you is be true to yourself. The only thing I own is my name and my reputation. And so be true to yourself in whatever you do. Be true to what your values are, and no one can take that away from you. And so I would leave you with those 5 things to think about as you spend the day together. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you, Mita. Those are 5 very powerful leadership lessons. And we're just gonna take a few minutes and give our ladies an opportunity to ask questions. And so if you'd like to ask Mita a question, please use the raise your hand feature. And then I'm gonna moderate and call on people. But I do wanna say, Mita, that one of the most powerful things that still resonates in my head that you said this summer with our She Works cohort was that we must all be leaders of inclusion, and that we must all work to build authentic bridges to people whose lives are different from our own. So thank you for always sharing your wisdom and your experience with us. It's so powerful.
No, thank you.
So with that, I'm going to go over and look at if we have any questions from our audience, and we're just waiting for the ladies to queue up. Let's see. And so our first question, as I call on people, you can go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question to Mita. So our first question comes from Phoebe Kurth, who is a freshman at Villanova University.
Hi, thank you so much for speaking. That was very inspiring. My question is about female mentorship, and if you had a mentor in your career or education, and the importance of it and what effect it had on your career.
I've had so many fantastic mentors over the years. Thank you for that question. I would say one of the things I would encourage you all to think about as you enter your workplaces, your organizations, and what you're thinking about doing next in your careers is thinking about mentorship versus sponsorship, right? I think women are over-mentored. We have access to lots of mentors. I think I have access to, as now I have a 5- and 7-year-old, and we're going through different stages, lots of working mothers who are helpful to me. I had access to individuals who are in HR, who are in marketing. So mentorship is really important. And I would not have gotten where I am today without a village of individuals helping me. And of course, over time, mentorship is just like friendship. Some mentorships last in that moment, others you move on from, some I've had for many, many years. But what you really want to be looking at is sponsorship. And sponsorship takes it a step deeper. And what I mean by that is Gail Tifford, who is the chief brand officer at WW, who's someone I'm close to. We used to work together at Unilever. You can certainly look her up. She once shared with me the following piece of advice and said, do you know who's talking about your career when you're not in the room? People are talking about me when I'm not in the room? Yes, they are. They're calibrating you. They're talking about what next assignment you could get. They're talking about your leadership style, your performance. And so you really want to think about people that are 2 levels above you in organizations who know your work, who know your output, who know your brand, who are going to be fighting for you to think about what are the assignments and things that you can be coming up for. Because I think that is one of, as we look at the statistics of representation of women, especially as you look at C-suite and really outside of C-suite, that is one of the things that the pipeline in making sure that enough women have access to those roles.
Thank you. Our next question comes from the extraordinary Victoria Iberagira, who is a junior at the Manhattan College of Music.
Hi, thank you so much for coming to talk with us today. My question was about talking to people who may not necessarily have the same beliefs that we have, and it's so necessary that we have these conversations. But in my experience, it's really hard to even get it started. So I was wondering how we should go about approaching these situations so that they're productive and both sides end up getting something out of it.
That's a great question. I'm still learning. I don't have the answer to that. But what I would say is it is about, how should I say this? Sometimes taking the high road, right? Like when people are saying things that might be triggering you, rather than responding to that trigger, say, tell me more. Why do you feel this way, right? An interesting conversation I had with somebody I want to say like it was 2 years ago around building the wall. And when President Trump was talking about building a wall, I was very surprised that this individual who was close to me in my life actually said that they were supporting President Trump in building the wall. And so I asked her, rather than maybe that being a trigger point for me, saying, well, could you tell me a little bit more about why you think we should build a wall? So I think it's asking more open-ended questions and really trying to take the emotion out of it. And I actually found out something very interesting where she talked a lot about what's happened in Jerusalem, right? And her family's from there. So I got a very different perspective that actually had nothing to do with what's happening in the US right now, but a perspective of what's happening in other parts of the world and why she felt that way. So I do think there's a piece of not being triggered, sometimes taking the higher road, but asking open-ended questions, right? So you can learn more without judgment. And I also think you also have to be in a place and you have to be ready to have that conversation. You have to be mentally prepared, right, to go in. And sometimes we're not, and that's okay. But that would be my piece of advice.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And our final question comes from Abnerline Massonet, who is a high school senior from Stamford, Connecticut.
Hi, Mita. Thank you for being here. My name is Abnerline. My question for you is, sometimes I feel like I'm running around in circles when it comes to, change and racial justice change. And I was wondering, what are some ways that we can bring innovative change and start looking at things in a different direction, in a new perspective?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I'll tell you what I'm struggling with right now. There was a statistic I read recently that said in the United States last year, we spent $8 billion on diversity and inclusion training. With a B, $8 billion. And so I think that one of the things I'm struggling with is you can be a leader who comes to me, and let's say you're a white leader and you say that Black Lives Matters and you really care about what's happening in the world. And how can you help? My question to you is, do you have deep cross-cultural relationships at home? Do you know anyone who's Black? And I say that very, I don't mean to be flip about it. My point is that we have to really start on inclusion and the work at home, right? We have to start thinking about, when I talk to leaders, I say, you know, let's say this was pre-pandemic. Where do you live? Who are your neighbors? How do you spend your weekends? Who do you spend them with? Where do you get your hair cut? Where do you go grocery shopping? And when you have those 5 really important, when you have those life decisions to make, who are the 5 people you call? And if they all look like you and act like you, we're self-segregating. And so I think so much of it starts with at home, like how are you building deep cross-cultural relationships? And how are you, again, building empathy and getting to know experiences that are not your own? And as Sherry said in our conversation from a few months back, is building those authentic bridges. And then I think when you start to understand different views, then you can become advocates. And so to your point on like how to make change, I think a lot of the change starts in our school systems. It starts in our homes. It starts when we say an auntie and uncle or a relative makes a racist slur or comment, and you say, no, that's not what you say. Let me educate you. That stuff it all starts at home, because we can't expect that we're going to be doing all these trainings at work or in our universities, and then all of a sudden, magically, people will become inclusive. The trainings are important. I'd say it's like learning a language. You have to do this every single day, but you have to be practicing it at home. And you have to start looking at, what are the systems that I live in and I operate in? What are the systems of racism and the structures that have been built around me that I'm unknowingly participating in? And really, I think the job that needs to be done is to boil it down to your world, because otherwise it can feel very overwhelming right now on where I might start. But really start to think about what's happening in your own home and in your own town and how you can make change.
Thank you.
So thank you so much, Mita, for sharing your story and your leadership lessons and answering our questions and giving us the perspective that we need to rise as leaders. And I think, you know, your perspective around being an inclusive leader is so timely and so important right now. So we're grateful for you coming back and sharing that with us.
Thank you. Thank you for all that you're doing.
Bye.
See you soon. Bye.